here. This course is New Religions and Media, and it's taught at Loyola University, New Orleans, and I'm Catherine Wessinger. And I'm very pleased and grateful that we have two guest speakers today. Clive Doyle is originally from Melbourne, Australia, where he and his mother, Edna Doyle, became Seventh-day Adventists. Subsequently, they read the Davidian message being disseminated by Victor Houteff in Waco, Texas, and they became Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. In 1964, Clive learned about the Branch Davidian message being taught by Ben Roden. In 1966, he and several other young Australian Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventists flew to Texas to stop at the Branch Davidians' Mount Carmel Center on their way to live in Israel. Clive Doyle ended up staying at Mount Carmel Center outside Waco, Texas. He married, had two daughters, became an American citizen, and later divorced. After a young man named Vernon Howell arrived at Mount Carmel Center in 1981, by 1984, Clive Doyle was one of the longtime Branch Davidians who accepted Howell, later known as David Koresh, as a prophet in the lineage of Seventh-day Adventist Davidian and Branch Davidian prophets believed to receive new light on the Bible's apocalyptic prophecies. Clive Doyle was present at Mount Carmel Center on February 28, 1993, when agents with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms attempted a dynamic entry into the building, resulting in a shootout that caused the deaths of 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians. He was present at Mount Carmel during the 51-day siege conducted by FBI agents. He was at Mount Carmel Center during the tank and CS gas assault by FBI agents on April 19, 1993. He escaped the resulting fire in which 76 Branch Davidians of all ages, including his youngest daughter, Sherry Doyle, died. Clive was one of the Branch Davidian survivors put into prison and held for a criminal trial by jury in 1995. Clive Doyle was acquitted of all charges. Upon his release, he returned to Waco. His autobiography, titled A Journey to Waco, Autobiography of a Branch Davidian, was published in 2012. David Thibodeau is originally from Maine. He's a drummer. He met David Koresh in 1990 in Los Angeles. He moved to Mount Carmel Center and became one of the drummers in Koresh's band. David Thibodeau is a survivor of the ATF assault, the 51-day siege, and the FBI tank and gas assault on April 19, 1993. He escaped the fire from the same location in the building as did Clive Doyle. David Thibodeau's autobiography, written with Leon Whiteson, was published in 1999. His book was one of 2 autobiographies that were the basis of the 2018 Waco miniseries, which is now on Netflix. His book was republished in 2018 with the title Waco, A Survivor's Story. His website is at wacosurvivors.com. Clive Doyle and David Thibodeau, thank you for speaking with my students today. And I've asked that each of you take 20 minutes to discuss a couple of topics. First, the role of various types of media that were involved during the assaults and the siege. And these include the print newspaper, television, radio, and any other relevant media. And then please share your thoughts on your experiences giving interviews to reporters and documentary makers, and your own motivations for producing media yourselves, including your books. For David Thibodeau, this will include your advising the directors of the Waco miniseries and your other media projects. And then after each of you speak, then the students will ask you questions. So Clive, if you could go first, please.
Okay. I'm glad to be here with you all today. As Catherine said, I came over to the United States in 1966. I've been here off and on since then. I was on my way to Israel, but never made it. I've had a couple of tickets to Israel, still haven't been there. But in regards to dealing with the media, probably the first thing that comes to my mind in regards to our situation is that the Waco Tribune decided to do an expose of our religious group that was out east of Waco at Mount Carmel. And to my knowledge, they never interviewed any of our people in order to get their story or to check out their story as to whether it was accurate or not. They went about making an expose or trying to warn people that we were a dangerous cult, basically. And as a result of that, or whether they were influential in getting the ATF to attack us on February 28, I'm not sure. I think pretty much the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was already well entrenched in their plans to do this dynamic entry that Catherine mentioned. And I think they felt that the newspaper actually got in their way by tipping us off to some extent. But we had an ATF agent that had been living across the road, watching us for almost 2 months. He had been coming over for Bible studies and so forth. And I remember on the Saturday, February 27, he showed up with the first copy of this Sinful Messiah series that the paper was putting out. And so we read it during our meeting. It was discussed a little bit. And like I said, I think the ATF were upset that it had come out, but it didn't, what shall we say, it wasn't the only thing that gave us a clue that there was some ill feeling toward us, you might say, because the paper was basically calling for something to be done about us, bring us to an end or whatever. So how much that influenced them, I'm not sure. But on the Sunday, Robert Rodriguez, who was the agent that had been coming over for Bible studies and everything, he had told us on the Saturday night that he was leaving town for a couple of weeks and he wouldn't be back. And so it was a surprise to us on the Sunday morning, the 28th of February. He showed up again with part 2 of the series that was printed in the newspaper. And so shortly before the ATF raided us, he was sitting in the foyer just inside the front door of the building, talking with David. And all of a sudden he got a little agitated and said he had to leave to go get some breakfast, which his anxiety, I think, went way beyond having breakfast. But I think he got the idea that he was possibly going to be caught in the crossfire of their dynamic raid. And so he left. But prior to that, 2 of our guys had gone out early that morning to get the paper ourselves, the second part of the series. Don Buns went out the gate to the left, and we never saw him again. We found out he'd been arrested down the road, and they kept him locked in a motel room with the ATF and that for the whole duration of the siege. David Jones, the son of Perry Jones, which was David Koresh's father-in-law, he had gone to the right to get a paper, but in the course of going to a place that he could pick up a copy, he saw a reporter down the road about maybe half a mile or so, parked on the side of the road. And so David thought there was something wrong. So he stopped and asked him, did he need help? And the guy said, well, he was looking for Mount Carmel. So in the course of talking to him, he's the one that said, well, I'm out here to report a raid. There's something going down today. And we were, the media were all informed by the ATF to be on the scene to film all this. And the ATF figured it would be a publicity stunt. They'd be covered by the regular media. So, newspapers, television stations and all that, they all have an agenda. Whenever, they're sent out to cover some story, it's not just for the news factor of it or the interest of it as a news item, but they're out most times with an agenda, with a plan or whatever. And so they're there, especially after the fact, they come out and they want to interview you. They have their mind made up as to whether you're guilty or not guilty, or whether whatever you say might be truth. They're not there to learn something. They're there to get something on film or in print that basically can be used against you later on. They can say, well, you said this and turned out not to be true or whatever. So I find a lot of prejudice, not so much with the reporters. We've had many reporters from TV stations and the newspaper, which are actually quite moved when we spoke to them, when we shared what we believed and what happened. You could see many of them were actually moved and touched by it. But in going back to their bosses at the news station, they find that the manager, the boss, has an opinion. He has an agenda to, that he's focused on. And I can understand that because everybody has beliefs of their own. Most people have some kind of religious belief, some kind of political persuasion, and that all clouds the news the way they cover it. So, like I said, I can understand that. But if you're going to tell the truth, you have to be unbiased. You have to tell it factually, the way it really happened, or the way you're being told it happened, and not be biased toward the person you're interviewing. So we've run into that over the year. Many of the reporters, especially from television and so forth, they get irate. They start accusing you of doing things or having an attitude or whatever. They write you off as whatever the government, whatever law enforcement or their boss says we are, that's what we are. And so they try to not allow what you're saying to affect them, to change their mind or anything like that. They're groomed prior to their coming out for an interview. They're groomed to not get involved, not to take sides, not to be persuaded or hoodwinked, as they might say. So whenever I've had to give interviews or chosen to give interviews over the years, you see that struggle going on in the mind of the various ones that you're dealing with, that can we afford to accept what's being said by myself or any of the other survivors in our case, or do we have to keep focused that these are bad people, the government said they're bad, And so we got to maintain that in our reporting. So, you know, the public, I don't think realizes just how much prejudice or how much their preconceived ideas play in the role of reporting an incident, you know, to whether it's factual or not, but they don't check it out. They don't research it for themselves. Like, for instance, during the siege, the FBI and the ATF were giving morning briefings every day, and the press were all invited to listen and to give a report on it. But most of them, by and large, the most of the ones that were in there just used whatever the government gave them without ever checking to see if it was factual or you know, honest or whatever. They just report what they were told. And I was told by several reporters that if they so much as asked an awkward question during those briefings, they were basically told, don't be coming back tomorrow because you won't get in. If you didn't kind of play along with the ATF or law enforcement, you wouldn't get a story the next day. So a lot of them, I think, you know, every once in a while you read a story about a news people that really research and do a lot of legwork and stuff like that to get a good story. A lot of those get awards for doing all that work, but most of them take the easy way out and just repeat whatever's presented to them and buy into it. I mean, they accept it as gospel, you might say, which is a shame because there's always two sides to a story. And, you know, even if our religious group was so different to everybody else that we would be considered crazy or maybe an enemy or something like that, as human beings, we still deserve, you know, freedom of belief, freedom of religion, and needed to be treated fairly, I believe.
So Clive, what about your book and what was your motivation for publishing your story in your book?
When I first got out of the hospital and of course I went to jail for almost a year leading up to the trial, but the first thing that was said to me by quite a number of people was, "Oh, you survived the fire, you survived the raid, you didn't get shot, and here you are free. You survived the court case and were allowed to go free." And so a lot of people put the idea in my mind that God saved you for a purpose. Somebody had to tell the truth, or you know, to the public, because it wasn't getting out through the media and it wasn't getting out through official reports from the government or law enforcement. And so people like myself and David Thibodeau and a few others that survived all of this feel, well, God must have wanted us to be having been eyewitnesses and participants in what went on. Somebody had to tell the story. David's not here to defend himself. Most of the ones that died are not here to tell their story. So it falls to a couple of us, two or three of us that are left, to try to set the record straight. And so that was one of the reasons for writing a book. I didn't want to write it to become famous or rich or whatever, but it gave people an alternative view of history. This is a historical situation, and a lot of things that were done wrong. The government has admitted some of it, but not all of it. And so the people that are interested in this subject, whether it's just as an academic, job of learning about different religions or different events, so be it. But to us, we were involved in it because we believed in it. And so it gives other people an idea or an opportunity to not only learn what happened, but to learn why some people were there, why they still believe in it, why they hang on to their faith in spite of everything that's happened. So the book, our interviews and so forth, give us that opportunity to give due respect to those that paid for it with their life.
Okay. Thank you, Clive. David Thibodeau, if you could please talk about your experience of the role of the media during the events in '93, and then also about your book and your experiences and motivations for producing media.
Well, Clive covered quite a bit. That was great.
Yeah. Where are you, David? I don't see you.
I'm right here.
Okay.
Nice.
Just keep talking and it'll pop up. Your view will pop up. Okay.
Oh, if you can mute Clive maybe, because.
All right. Okay, I'll do that. Okay. Now you are muted. Shall I unmute you, David? Yeah, now you're okay.
Okay.
There we go. All right.
Is that better?
Mm-hmm. That's better.
Okay, great. Maybe Clive, can you turn that down a little bit? Yours, if you know how. Okay. Sorry about all this. So, well, there was a couple of things that I was thinking about while Clive was talking. Really our first introduction to the media was probably when the film crew came over from Australia. We knew there was a lot of Australians that had left the group and had been making waves for David. And so we had a film crew come over, and they claimed that they wanted to get our side of it, but the questions all seemed very one-sided and very loaded, if you will. And so I think our experience with that early on was pretty negative. We just felt like they weren't there to find out our side or what the truth was or what our group considered the truth, because the truth was all scriptural as far as the Davidians and the movement that had been there for a long time had been, which me as a kind of a secular person, baptized Catholic, I never ran into a group that really studied the scripture and wanted to know what the book actually said. And for me growing up, the only thing I was interested in what the book actually said, and not what religions said about the book, including the Catholic Church, because it was just, you go there and you're up, down, you're on your knees, you're up again. You're just, my grandmother used to make me say my prayers at night. And it was like, you send 100,000 Hail Marys for this kind of stuff I would do, and I'd be fine. That never made any sense to me. In other words, I knew that there was some kind of mystery to the book, and I wanted to know what it meant. Hold on one second. Get down. I got cats going crazy here today. Sorry about that, guys. So, so the Australian thing left a bad taste, I think, in everyone's mouth for sure. And then, that came out, and we felt it was just very one-sided. And it was very there to get David and to get what, to gun for the community, if you will. What's really interesting is, when you're in a community that studies the scripture and you're learning the scripture, you're living in a very different world than what white Western secular societies or any group in the world that is more influenced by television than anything else would know and have an understanding of. So when you live in the realms of the scripture, it's like going back in time a couple thousand years. And those laws were the important laws, not so much the laws of man. So we were, very much with the dietetic stuff, all that. So the point I want to make is it's kind of shocking when you get someone or a group of people or press who are so one-sided against you and are accusing you of doing things that scripturally are okay. And it's just like, well, you know, then why do we even have the Bible? It's kind of what like were my thoughts. Why, when we go to court, or at least at the time that I was young, you had to place your right hand on the Bible and you had to swear an oath. So the Bible obviously has been very important, even within our the structure here of America. You know, in our laws, in our court system. So, you know, these kind of things with the press, we just always saw things differently. And I'll give you an example. Is after that first series came out, the very first Sinful Messiah, we kind of had the feeling of foreboding for sure. We knew something was going to happen because the way the article was written, it was written in a very one-sided way. It was written just to basically make us look like we were a group of fanatical Bible believers, if you will, and people that believed really in one guy. They didn't even talk about our faith in Scripture. It was all about David. David was a manipulator. David was this. David was that. We were following him. We were under his spell, and that was kind of how these articles were structured. And so we knew something was going to happen. We just didn't know it was going to be the next day. The ATF attacked, of course. Then the 51-day siege is set up. And some of the first things that occurred were, as I was watching, we did have TV in there, and I would watch some of the news broadcasts that were happening. And early on, I remember one. They had this older woman who had way too much makeup on, and she was one of the one of the newscasters. She said, the problem that the Mount Carmel situation here, this is the problem. And she held up a 223 round, like a bullet. And she goes, this is the kind of bullet that the ATF were using when they came in to serve a search warrant. And this is the type of bullet. And she holds a 50 caliber bullet up, which is like this long, this thick around. And she goes, and this is the type of bullet that the Davidians were using against the ATF. And that's probably why the ATF didn't get into the property. And, you know, I just remember watching this and going, what are you talking about? You know, she made it sound like everybody in the community had a 50 caliber firearm, or we were shooting against the ATF. And that was not the case at all. You know, some people, not everybody had a firearm. Not everybody fired against the ATF. It was a group of a few people, a few individuals that kept them at bay. And just they were already making it sound like we went out gunning for the ATF. And that if you were on the inside when they came in, you heard the helicopters, and you heard the helicopters firing into the building, or people that witnessed the helicopters firing into the building, or if you were at the front door and you saw all these guys dressed in black coming at your door, yelling and screaming and shooting at the door, where the door flies back in the hands of Dave while he's got his hand out, you have a very different perspective. And so to see the media start to set the public up for the scenario they want was quite shocking. And one of the reasons it was shocking is because the biblical group of Mount Carmel believed ourselves to be the humble and contrite spirits of God. We believed that we were there on a testing ground, if you will. We went without certain things, without certain comforts. We had a certain dietary law. You know, there were things that we did. It was all about really very much the fear of God. That's, as every scripture, as all the prophets talk about, the fear of God as being the beginning of wisdom, and that the people of God are more like sheep, and it's the goats, it's the children of the world, if you will, or the king of the north, or the authorities that will attack the message as we looked at it, would be the goats, and there would be the pride and the arrogant. And from every newscast, after watching time and time again, every day we'd watch the press conferences, and every day David would make an agreement with them, or Steve Schneider would make an agreement with the FBI negotiators. And it seemed like the tactical commanders would do the exact opposite. So they said they wouldn't come on the property early on. That very next day, they're coming on the property and destroying sheds at the outskirts of the property. You know, this happened time and time again. Okay, they said, come out, come out. They always wanted us to come out. Then if someone exited the building, they would throw a flashbang grenade at you. So it was this extreme, like, talking to us very nicely and sweetly and doing the exact opposite of how they're talking. And that occurred every day for 51 days. So literally by week 1 or 2, we don't believe a word that they say. Okay, they had no credibility with us. And David's message got even more powerful and more powerful and more powerful, because here are all the prophets talking about a group that'll come to be proud and arrogant, and they will, they will cast stones at the people of God. And there's all these scriptures I can back up, and hundreds of scriptures kind of to show the pride of the arrogance of the authorities fighting against the people who believe God's word, if you will. I'm trying to simplify all this, but the press played a huge part of that, because they solidified our faith as this went on with their lies, with their continual lies. And one of the things that Clive talked about earlier that I definitely wanted to touch on is every once in a while after the fact, we were inundated with people that wanted to interview us. Many interviews I gave to journalists, and I would walk into the room and the journalists would be like this. They'd start asking me questions. They'd have their arms crossed. And literally 2 or 3 minutes into me talking, the arms would come down. About 5 minutes into me talking, the hands would come up like this, and they'd have their elbows on the table. And I could see the change in their perception. And I said, I would stop. I remember this one journalist in particular. It was a woman. I can't remember what group she was with, what news organization. But I said, you didn't expect this, did you? She goes, no, I expected you to be a raving lunatic. I said, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but this is the truth of the matter. You've been lied to. And I said, and here's what's going to happen next, because at this point I had some experience with it. I said, you're going to do whatever report you want to do. You're going to write it up. You're going to edit it, however you want to edit it. And then there's going to be a higher power that's going to come in, your editor, and it's going to change everything. He's going to cut what I have to say. She goes, I pretty much have a lot of control in what my piece is. I said, I think you're going to find out that you don't. And sure enough, the piece would come out, and they would have me saying 1 or 2 things. They would do things like this. They'd ask me, do you think David Koresh is coming back? And I would say, I believe, like millions of people believe all over the world, that we're on the precipice of great spiritual events, and many things that are spoken of in Revelation could take place, like the kingdom being set up in a great earthquake, if you will. I mean, there's all kinds of things that talk about the kingdom to be set up. Every single prophet talks about it. Those are the things that I look to as happening. So they didn't take that thought. What they cut it up, and they had me saying, I believe, cut, and there's the cut, abrupt cut. So do you believe David Koresh is coming back? And I believe, and that's it. Because they knew they couldn't use the rest of my thought, because it's not what they wanted. It's not how they wanted to cut it. It's not how they wanted to present their outlook on things. If I can say this really quick, in Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, he talks about taking different papers from all over the world, New York Times, London Times, the Israeli papers, Greek papers, and finding a worldwide article, and then dissecting each country and how they present that same information that goes out on the AP. And you can see in different countries, certain phrases are taken out, certain paragraphs are taken out, certain words are changed. And that's all to promote the way the country and the political people that be in that country want to perceive a specific thing. So it's very detailed. It takes a lot of time, and it's really sometimes just a perception of a word or two, or a sentence or two can change the entire outlook of an article. And so I think basically Clive and I have seen that to a very fine point. We have seen over and over and over again our truth get changed and not be told properly or correctly to fit someone else's agenda.
And so, David, if you could talk about your book and your motivation for writing your book, and then also the other media creation that you've been involved with.
Okay, sure. As far as the book's concerned, I wrote the book out of frustration. I got so sick of being cut and edited and changed. And I got so sick of hearing like how evil David was and how all the people were just victims. And, the impression was probably not the most intelligent people. They had to follow this guy. They had the hole in their life. Maybe their daddy wasn't around for them or something like that. It was all these psychological ramifications on why we chose to be there at Mount Carmel. And I didn't feel that any of them were proper or any of them fit. I knew, like, for example, they were calling Paul Fata the blood merchant of the group, and he was on America's Most Wanted. Paul Fata is the most soft-spoken guy you've ever met in your life. Clive Doyle, they try to accuse him of, oh, you know, he had Clive Doyle has done all these things, and we're pretty sure that he set the fire because there was fuel on his shoes. But they don't mention that that the tanks destroyed these. We had these 3 500-gallon drums of fuel, diesel fuel, and 2 unleadeds, and the tanks poured those out just days before the siege was to end with the fire. Poured them out all over the ground right in front of where we all came out. They don't mention that. And I sat there and I watched 500 gallons of fuel pour onto the ground. So what they do is, it's really funny. I've been reading this book about to get to a matter, you have to understand why, the reason why, and how our perceptions are very skewed by what we see and hear without having the complete picture or all the details. So it's very easy to say, yeah, Clive Doyle had, you know, fuel on his shoes, but then not mention the fact that they made him walk by having the Red Cross sign through a place where the government had poured out fuel onto the ground. So it's these kind of things. And this is the kind of thing that really drives me crazy to this day. And to get to your question, I'm working on a documentary about Waco. I have a website called wacosurvivors.com, where I'm trying to have information like some of the audio tapes, some of David Koresh's sermons, so you can hear those for yourself. Some of the FBI negotiations, all of the FBI negotiation transcripts. There's a ton more we want to put on there, but it's, you know, it's a work in progress, to say the least. But what was my point? I had a point. It was good. There we go.
Well, your documentary. So you're making a
Oh.
documentary?
Working on it. It's going slow, but it is going.
Okay.
And here's what upsets me about all the documentaries that have been done. And I watched some of the A&E one, which I didn't think was too bad. Some of I like the one that had, I think it was the A&E one that had the interview with Roger Haldeman, which I found fascinating. Interviews that you hadn't normally seen before. Those are great. And I remember watching this documentary going, this is really good. I'm really impressed with this. These are all things I had not known or seen before, most of it. But then it gets to the end, and the end is the same conclusion. The Davidians started the fire. They were, you know, there's 51 days. They were just toying with the FBI, and they set the fire. And my point is, listen, there's a ton of evidence to indicate that could have gone the other way as well. We have infrared with 2 explosions at the back of the building, right where the gym was destroyed by the tanks and leveled to the ground. 2 explosions, pyrotechnic devices that were so powerful that from a mile or 2 miles up, the infrared camera guy in the plane that was flying above Mount Carmel, the FBI guy, focuses in on the window where the explosions were. How can you explain that? And that's right next to where the government tanks were. All the fully automatic weapons fire that's on infrared from
Actually, David, if you could just explain what you're referring to, the FLIR tapes, because actually the students did watch the interview I did with you that's on my YouTube channel, where you describe your reaction when you saw the FLIR tapes and the Waco Rules of Engagement video. But if you could just explain briefly what the FLIR tapes are and what was it that you saw that upset you so much?
Sure. The government had a plane flying above the building about a mile or 2 miles up, somewhere in there. And on that plane, they had something called FLIR technology, and it's videotape that that shows heat signatures. Okay, so if there's a fire, it's going to show up as white. Anything that's hot is going to show up as light. Anything that's cool or relatively cool is going to show up as dark. So most of the ground shows up as kind of grayish dark. The fire, when that starts, or explosions show as bright white light. When there's a gun firing, what I call full automatic, which is, you know, like flash, 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 you can see those flashes on the infrared very clearly next to the tapes. So, you know, it's a form of vision that's based on thermodynamics. That's FLIR. And so what upset me And I had talked for years about Waco, totally calm, at peace with myself. I didn't get angry when I was talking to audiences. I got to the point where I was talking to audiences of up to 500 people, because as I was getting very good at speaking for audiences. But then I saw the FLIR tape when they were putting together the rules of engagement. And after that, I became very angry. And I became angry because my suspicions that I didn't even want to believe were true. I read the autopsy reports early on, and I wondered why so many people had bullet wounds to the head, center of their head and their chest. That's not how you kill yourself. Remember, back then, the government is calling this a mass suicide over and over. Bill Clinton raises his finger, that famous finger, and he says, if a bunch of religious fanatics want to kill themselves, what can the federal government do about that? And after the 51-day siege, after all of that, that was the final word. And that statement was so powerful that everyone accepted that as being true. Oh, that's a good point. And everyone forgot about Waco after that, until Oklahoma City a couple years later. The point being that, oh, Bill, the point being that, there was so much more information that needed to be uncovered. And there were 2 trials that occurred. So much information was suppressed from the jury. So much was not allowed to be seen. To me, there's so much information that the American public still hasn't seen, especially about that last day. And frankly, I just want to show a separate perspective, a perspective to say, you know what, this very well could have occurred, but you guys never even give that a chance to be listened to, because the bottom line is that the government is responsible for the fire. And they're responsible. So many lawsuits, so many legal things could be opened up. I don't think now, because of the time that's gone by. But for me, and this is what's really important, if it wasn't a mass suicide, if even one person was shot trying to exit the back of the building, in my mind, that makes it a homicide. In my mind, it makes Mount Carmel a mass homicide, which changes the historical ramifications of everything. If even one person was shot by the government trying to leave, it is not a mass suicide anymore. And I think that there should be criminal action, and there should be real independent groups looking into what happened at that last day, and there should be responsibility. The big problem with this country right now, with BLM, Black Lives Matter, this is a movement that has been decades in the making. Oh man, a century in the making. These kind of atrocities have gone on forever, where the cops get away with it. They go to court, you go with killing someone, literally, they go to court and the system protects it. And as long as the system protects itself, we can't say that we have a constitutional government. We can't say that what America is supposed to be, that shining beacon on the hill, if you will. We're not there. We're a long way off. If even one innocent person goes to jail, or one innocent person is killed, and then the system comes in and protects the perpetrators.
Great. Thank you, David. And let me just mention, for the sake of information, that a special counsel was appointed. John Danforth was appointed to investigate, and the Danforth report was published in 2000. The same year there was the wrongful death civil lawsuit, and their FLIR experts concluded that the flashes seen behind the building on the FLIR tapes were not automatic gunfire, but were light flashing on metal or something, or puddles of water on the ground. Those were the government's FLIR experts and their conclusion. And that's why I think some of the students in their questions that they were asking last night wanted to know, why doesn't the public hear any more about the FLIR tapes? Well, that's why is a government report was written that discounted those flashes. However, the FLIR experts, such as the one shown in the Waco Rules of Engagement, who were not being paid by the government, they come to different conclusions that did reflect automatic gunfire. Okay.
Sure.
All right.
Can I respond,
By all
please, to
means.
that?
Mhm.
I'll leave you with this thought, guys. I'm sure you're all
Well, we're
free
going to have
thinkers.
questions. They're going to ask questions in a
Oh, good.
minute.
That's
But you go
great.
ahead. You go ahead.
I can't wait actually for that.
Okay.
But how on the faith of God's green earth, on the face of God's green earth, do you get sunlight reflections on a video technology that is thermodynamic? How do you get lights that are bright and flashing? How is that the sun reflecting on a film that only shows hot and cold sources? That's specifically what it's for. Okay, what I'm saying is I don't believe them. That's a lie. They said that because they have to have something. They can't admit that they shot people exiting this building. But frankly, and I say this a lot publicly, I think a 10 or 11-year-old can look at that tape and have an understanding that that's fully automatic weapons fire. I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that's fully automatic weapons fire. And again, I don't understand to this day how you can have sunlight reflections on a video technology that is thermodynamically based. It doesn't make sense. It lacks credibility.
Thank you, David. Okay, so students, what sort of questions would you like to ask Clive Doyle and David Thibodeau? And as you ask your question, of course, first unmute your mic, and that way I can see who wants to ask a question. Any questions from any of you? Go ahead, don't be shy. All right, let's see. Leland, I see your mic is unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi. I was curious, I guess for both of you, but I guess specifically David, since you're now working on documentaries in like today's landscape, how do you feel like the growth of like modern technologies like cell phones and like modern surveillance systems, like there's a lot more standards in place to hold people accountable because of those things? And how do you think the internet has sort of like helped keep this story alive other than being suppressed?
That's a great question. And I think technology has been our friend. And like I said, every time I see a video of a cop shooting a minority or anyone, frankly, it absolutely makes me crazy because I think not so much because of what I'm seeing, but all the hundreds of cases that we haven't seen, all the hundreds and hundreds of cases over the course of decades, probably thousands of cases, where we've had to take the cop's word, and the jury has always taken the cop's word, and we're finding out that word isn't so accurate, and that the thin blue line, if you will, has protected so many guilty people. And I just personally, I think I'm getting way off on your question. I apologize if I am, but everybody should be under the same law, and everyone should have to stand trial if you take someone's life. And just, there should be no justification for murder. I'm sorry. I just don't feel that there should be. So technology, I wish, had it been 10 years later that Mount Carmel had happened, we would have had cell phones in there, maybe 15 years later, not 10 years, but imagine if we could have taken video of the helicopter evidence of bullet holes in the ceiling and put that on Facebook. What kind of different outcome might we had of Mount Carmel? People would have been able to see the other side. So, this is all hypothetical, but I kind of wish that we would have had that then. So, I think technology is playing a huge part in keeping the story alive. But to me, it's not even keeping the story alive. Like Clive said, it's absolutely historical. It's here's a case where the victors aren't rewriting history. They tried to, and now 20 years later, they didn't kill us all. So there is another alternative viewpoint, and it doesn't really matter what the history books say, because Clive and I can do podcasts and we can talk to people for hours, and they can judge if we're being truthful or not. Because most people are pretty good judge if they're being BS'd or not. That's what I like about the podcast. It's 2 hours or an hour or whatever it is for you to just talk, and people know if you're being sincere or not. I think that's a very important form of media. I think it's a very exciting time that you all live in. I wish I were younger, my friend.
Thanks. And I'll just mention that the reason we have the footage of the ATF raid that we have is because there was the local television had a couple of reporters. One of them was a cameraman. One of them was a straight reporter. They pulled in directly behind the trucks pulling the cattle trailers with the ATF agents. So they immediately got out, and that cameraman got the footage that is available of the ATF raid. And then also, well, Clive talked about the role of the Waco Tribune Herald reporters, but they were also out on the street in front of Mount Carmel, and they took cover in a ditch on the road there. But their photographer, Ron Adelot, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he's got some really great still shots of the shootout, and of course he was very brave taking those shots at that particular time because bullets were coming over his head. So that's why we have the still shots and the video of the ATF raid that we have, and it's just because that those two reporting crews happen to be present. But do any other students have questions? We've got plenty of time. Oh yeah, here's Paris. I see a question in the chat for you. Do you want to speak up, Paris? Or do you want me to read it?
I can speak up. This is for either of y'all, but I just wanted to know how difficult has it been adjusting to life outside of Mount Carmel after the raid, or has it not been too difficult?
I'll have Clive goes first.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Clive, I think. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes. And I'm going to mute David. Okay. All right, go ahead, Clive.
What happened in my case was I ended up in Dallas, Parkland Hospital, because of the burns I had. And I felt real sorry for myself when I first went into the hospital. You know, I was in pain, I was in shock. I'd lost my daughter. And like I said, I felt pretty sorry for myself until I saw all the other patients in the hospital that were burned from head to foot, some of them 70, 80% covered in burns. And I took a different outlook. I thought to myself, I've got nothing to complain about when there's so many others a lot worse off than I am. And I've tried to have a positive outlook over the years since then. You know, there's things that you could get angry about, but it doesn't do any good. You have to show a better spirit than the people that hate us or the people that are trying to crucify us, so to speak, in the media or wherever. And so I've changed in my attitude a whole 180 degrees different than the way I used to think about people, about things. And it hasn't been easy. I've lost both my daughters in the last 27 years. I've lost my mother. And so, you know, I'm here basically on my own, except David lives next door to me. But, you know, you learn to live one day at a time, and you learn to do what you do and reason the way you reason because you want the truth. A lot of people say, oh, do you still believe what David taught? Or do you believe in God? I figure you'd give up on God after all of this. And I says, if I didn't have God in my life, if I didn't have the Spirit of God working with me every day, there's no point in living. You know, the fact that I'm still around, and I'm going to be 80 in a couple of months. So, you know, there's no sense in going on unless there's a purpose. And our purpose, David's and I, and several others, our purpose has been to try to show that we're not the kind of people we were painted as, either by the law enforcement or by the government lawyers or the newspapers or the TV articles that came out, where we were demonized. The government does that. Law enforcement does it to justify whatever they did. If they break the law, or if they get power hungry, if they, you know, use 25 bullets to shoot some kid on the street instead of one, or maybe should have tased him first, they need justification for that. So they try to demonize the victims. And like I said, it's not easy, but God gives me the spirit and the grace to deal with it and try to look at it from a positive point of view rather than a negative. And that's, if everybody can remember that, you know, if there's a news item on the news tonight, it's going to be 50% inaccurate. You know, if there's a car crash, the first thing you hear is, oh, 4 dead, and, you know, traffic backed up for the rest of the day and all of this sort of stuff. But then when you get down and go over it, you just listen to the news itself. The news changes over the next week. You know, the numbers change, and how many died or how many sick or whatever. The fact that it's continually changing shows they didn't get it right. Whoever reported it did not get it accurately right in the first place. And so, you know, if we can keep that in mind, research, dig in deeper, you know, find out what the real story is about whatever subject it is. And don't be so biased because you're a particular color, or you're a particular religion, or you're a particular job affiliation. You know, don't let that affect the fact that you can think for yourself and analyze what's being presented, or what you're seeing, or what you're being told.
Thank you, Clive. David Thibodeau, do you want to answer Paris's question?
Yeah, but my thing just cut out.
Yeah, I'm gonna unmute you. Hold on. Let me find it.
No,
I don't. Oh, I don't see your
the
name.
whole thing cut out.
He's offline, I think.
Hold on a second. I'm ready.
There you
Okay.
go.
They're coming up. I'm coming back on right now.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
I see you now.
I do have something to say to that.
Okay, let's unmute you. All right.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The adjusting part. I was only in the community for 2 years. And after I got out of high school, I wanted to go to Hollywood and, you know, go to music school, which I did. So I kind of had a more worldly perspective than most people that were at Mount Carmel, for sure. Yeah. So it was basically that 2 years of me understanding scripture and getting to know scripture, right? But at Mount Carmel, all the girls had, you know, shirts that went down past their butts, and everyone had, you know, long hair. They all had long pants on, where everyone was very conservative, if you will. Everyone dressed a very specific way. So one of my initial reactions after that couple of years and coming out of the siege, and then I went back to Maine for a while with my family, and that was a bit of a culture shock and hard to adjust to. But I quickly moved to Los Angeles after, because I got back with my old band. I definitely wanted to play music again. I wanted to get back to doing what I did, what I love to do, and that was play drums for groups. So when I moved back to LA, I remember very distinctly driving down Sunset Boulevard and seeing this huge billboard of this woman dressed in almost nothing. It was less than a bikini. And I can't remember what the product they were peddling, vodka or something, but it was just like this beautiful woman with almost no clothes on. And I remember very distinctly going, "Oh boy, that's Babylon for you. Look, there's Babylon on this huge billboard." And it's that getting back into the world and being shocked by something, and what we take for, like you see a woman in a bikini, no big deal. But when you're living in a religious group where everyone's very conservative and they keep their parts well hidden for obvious reasons, if you understand, religion, or just being modest, if you will. That billboard was ultimately shocking for me, and I remember being surprised at how shocking it was. That was something that stood out in my mind. And then over the course of just like, I remember going into a store and seeing things differently. I could never go into a store after Mount Carmel and see things the same. Toys were all geared around war, and I never noticed that as a kid. I had GI Joes. I loved playing with GI Joes and making these war fantasies in my head, but I didn't realize there might be a purpose for that, and it might be to help train me to get ready to go to war myself as an adult. Just the way that the subtle things that society does to get you ready for what they may want you to do someday. They meaning the government, obviously. So, these things, they were shocking to me. The one thing that I remember after Mount Carmel is I kept flowers by my bed for about a year because I wanted to wake up and smell flowers, because for some reason that was a weird thing with me, but that was important to appreciate life after Mount Carmel. And even the first time I went shopping, it was just the fact I was alive and was shopping was an amazing thing. And there was just moments like that made life very special. But the majority of the time you had survivor's guilt. You had all these factors going on in your head. Maybe I should have died there as well. You had people that would write me and tell me that I'm a disgrace to the Thibodeau name, and they wish that I would have died in the fire. So, if you listen to influences like this, and that time it wasn't social media. Someone had to write you a letter and send it to you. And it's funny, people like that, they never have a return address, I've noticed. Very cowardly. So I don't know, what am I trying to say here? All I can do is think of a warning, and that is that if you all engage, as you're all young, you're engaging in social media, obviously, don't let the haters or all that negativity, affect you. I know it's going to affect you, because how can it not? But just realize that, you guys are all special, and you all have your own lives, and you all have, there's, for some reason in this world, there's that kind of evil spirit where some people just want to break you down. I don't understand it. I don't know why. But, when you're reading a negative comment directed at you, don't let it roll off your back. Try to toughen your skin up a little bit, because that's just how people are. Some people just they take pleasure in causing other people pain. And I don't understand it. It's what Clive and I would call the mystery of iniquity, as spoken of in scripture, the mystery of iniquity. So these things, I'm conscious of, because I've had to toughen my hide. And, one of the reasons that I, for so many years, haven't been that public about this. I've given interviews here and there, but I never started a YouTube channel or anything like that, or a podcast, was because I didn't know how I would deal with that kind of criticism day in and day out, which I know I would have to deal with if I were to be a completely public figure, more so than I am now. And so I don't know. I'm just trying to say, I hope that you guys don't let that affect you negatively. And when you look in the mirror, you see a beautiful person, and don't let someone's negative words affect how you look at yourself. It's BS. It's not true.
All right. Thank you, David. Brant has a question for the two of you.
Either of you guys could answer this, but I feel like back, in the Mount Carmel days, the media coverage and news in general was much more localized. It wasn't necessarily as globalized. And now with younger generations and that spread of media coverage hitting more places in the world, and the idea that people don't necessarily just believe what they're told anymore, just necessarily believe in what the media is saying because of so much fake news. Do you have hope that in this new era that you can, with your documentaries and with these books, shed a new light on what really happened that day or over those days?
Sure. Clive, if you don't mind, I'm going to go first, just because I'm already unmuted.
Okay.
I think I can wrap it up quick, I hope. Maybe.
All right. Actually,
great.
Clive is unmuted too, so I'm going to mute him
Okay.
again. Okay.
Back then, it was CNN, I think, was just coming out. So there was and I don't know about global, but definitely within the country here, CNN was a thing. And I think they won an award for their coverage of Mount Carmel. But still, the government still determined how far back the media had to be. So it was two miles back. They weren't allowed to come any closer than 2 miles or 3 miles from the building. So all the images you got during the siege were from zoom lenses, telephoto lenses, that kind of thing. The problem I have with today is it requires an amazing amount of time to weed through the truth. You have to listen to Fox, and then you have to listen to CNNBC, and you have to get the two complete opposite sides of the spectrum and realize there's propaganda on the left side and there's propaganda on the right side, and somewhere in the middle lies the truth. I don't know of a channel or a news organization where you can go to and just get the truth. You really have to listen to different points of view and analyze it for yourself. That's incredibly time consuming. That's why at the beginning I mentioned the podcast. At least you know if there's an interview that's worth his salt and it's just talking to a person, having, like, I hate to bring up Joe Rogan all the time, but he's just good at having a conversation with a person and you get a feeling of who that person is. To me, that's so important. And that's something that just never had before. So, I think that it's going to be defined within the next decade. Truth, finding truth. It's just so subjective because there's so many world points, world views, if you will. But I'm just glad that there are choices. But just remember, they may not all be American choices. If I could say this one more thing to that. This really blew my mind about Google. When I was on the set of the Waco series, I was talking to one of the producers about a picture of J. Edgar Hoover. That's it. The original, the gentleman who started the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Of course, he was the director for many, many years, most of his life. He had a male partner in his life, Clyde, who was with him the entire time, who a lot of people thought that they had a personal relationship. And the thing that makes that so hypocritical, if you will, is that he went after many, many gay people. He destroyed many people's lives, many homosexual people's lives. Anyone who basically was against him politically, he would have information on them and destroy their lives. Well, there's some pictures that came up in the 80s with him dressed in drag with Clyde. And they were dressed, that was them, that was their bodies with paint, face painted like a woman. And again, I don't have a problem with that or whatever you want to do to make you happy, make you comfortable. But if you're going to go after a bunch of people and ruin their lives, okay, and then point the finger at what they're doing, you're doing the same thing behind closed doors, that's what I got the problem with. I bring this up because I remember seeing these pictures, and I remember one just showing the producer these pictures, and I spent about 3 hours one day going to Google, Yelp. I went through all of them, everything I could think of to try to find these pictures online. They were not there. They were scrubbed. They're scrubbed from the internet. What I found was one picture of J. Edgar Hoover's face imposed on obviously on a woman, a beautiful woman's body with his face superimposed on it. And I think they purposely did that so people looking for that the original picture will say, oh, look at how fake that is. That's obviously faked. J. Edgar Hoover never dressed in drag. Well, that's not but you can't find the picture online. And if you can, you got some skills, because I looked 3 hours. So my point is, if they really don't want you to find something, they're going to scrub it from the internet. It's going to be very hard to find. So, yeah, internet obviously is a great source. It's a great tool, but it's not the end all.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm nodding because I've searched for things too and concluded that they were scrubbed. But Clive, do you want to address, and thank you, David. Clive, do you want to address Brant's question? And let me unmute Clive. I'm trying. I'm clicking ask to unmute, but nothing's happening. Is Clive receiving a message there to unmute? Oh,
Here we go.
got it. Got it. Okay, go ahead.
Could you repeat the question that she asked?
Yeah, Brant, if you could repeat the question, please.
Yeah. Basically, I was saying that as time goes on and we have more and more media coverage, even though, you know, a lot of it is perceived now as like fake news, and people are taught to think for themselves more, do you think that will eventually shed like a hopeful light on what actually happened by people, you know, not necessarily believing what they've been told and doing research for themselves?
I'd say it depends on the person's prejudice. You know, I hear in this country with the election and everything, you've got two parties. You got Democrats and Republicans. And some of the stuff that the Republicans say is so obviously parroting what they've been told to say rather than thinking for themselves. They don't reason anything through. They just, you know, parrot it back. And I would like to see, and it's hard to do, like I said, because of prejudice, because of not studying, not learning. Like I was taught when I was like 12 years old, when you read, you should read everything about the author, about the book that he's writing, why he wrote the book, etc., etc. And most people don't do that. When I was a kid, I didn't. If I came to a phrase in Latin or French or something, I just jumped over it. If I came to words I didn't understand, I didn't bother looking them up. I skipped it. And you miss so much. And so ever since then, if there's a subject that interests me, I get everything I can on it, even if it's negative or if it's from a totally opposing point of view. I want to hear it to evaluate it, see if it holds up under scrutiny. And I think I'd suggest that everybody, especially students, do that. You see what I'm saying? Does what I believe make sense? Does it, can I prove it? You know, do I have all of the material to either prove it, or do I have the integrity to maybe consider something else? And, but not everybody is students. A lot of people read. I had a daughter that could read the Bible when she was 3 and 4 years old. And they failed her in reading in school when she was in elementary school. That kind of made me upset. I went to the school. I said, how could you give her a failing grade in reading? She's been reading since she was able to walk around. I said, oh, she can read, but she can't compute it. She can't comprehend it. She can't tell you what it's about. She can't, you know. And so I tried it on my daughter. I said, I'd see her reading a book. I said, what are you reading? Oh, a book. Well, what's it about? A dog. I said, have you read this book before? Oh, yes, about 5 or 6 times. Well, tell me the story. She couldn't do it. And that's what they were talking about, was the comprehension of what you're reading, thinking about it, persevering to find out what it was that you were told. Does it make more sense than just guessing or just listening to somebody else's opinion and buying into that just because it's the lazy way out? You know what I'm saying? Just like the media that went to the morning briefings every day. As soon as it was over, they'd run out and get on the phones or get their story in to where, you know, the newspaper or TV station or whatever, they'd get it in and they got paid for it. They did not go and say, well, I want to check this particular item or this particular piece of information and see if it's valid. And so there were those that took the extra effort. Many of them have written books. People like Dick Revis, and there were other media people that we met that I give high marks to, because they took the time to check out the information, not just because the ATF or the FBI or the lawyers or whatever fed them a line, the quote for the day sort of thing. Check it out. And so if you can, if I can encourage anybody to really put the time in, you got, like you were saying, there's so much media, there's so much different technology. I'm at a loss with this thing that we're doing today. I haven't got a clue about Zoom, or I don't use email, I don't use Facebook. I still write a letter. I probably be still writing it with a goose quill pen, except there's not too many geese around Waco. But I'm old fashioned. I've seen everything in the last 80 years and seen how everything's developed, but I don't think it's necessarily got any better. Like, I just was cleaning my house and I just threw out 10 or 20,000 cards with addresses on. I dumped them after all this time. People say, oh, you can just put it in your computer. I said, yeah, but when I put it in the computer and the computer crashes, I've lost it all. If I've got an old videotape with a movie on it and I want to watch it, I can stick it in the machine and watch it. But now everybody says, oh, get rid of them, put it in the cloud, put it in this, do it this way, that way. And there's always bugs, there's always problems. Your server decides you missed a payment, so they cut off your service. So all the technology definitely has some advantages to it. The guy that invented the television way back, it seemed like a good thing. There was so much good you could do with television. But for those that lived through the television years, you can look back and see how much of it has been used for violence, for corruption, for pornography, for just about anything can be on the television or on the computer. See, it's not used for good all the time. And so a thinking person has to decide, just because it's there and easy to access, perhaps, or whatever, is it more important than an eyewitness account or a spoken word or something that's written in longhand?
All right. Well, thank you, Clive. And thank you also, David Thibodeau. And thank you to the students. The students are going to have other classes that they have to get to. But Clive and David, we really appreciate your spending this time with us. And I'll be in touch with the two of you, and I'll also be in touch with the students. So thank you very much to our guest speakers.
You have a good day.
Guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.